The Autism Research Institute relies on the generosity of donors like you to make this webcast possible. If you enjoy this presentation, please consider making a donation. Thank you.
Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Vicki Kobliner is a registered dietitian nutritionist with many years of experience in applying a functional approach to nutrition. She develops individualized plans for clients, which are designed to promote wellness, prevent disease, and rebalance underlying nutritional impairments. A key element of this approach is the optimization of digestive function. Research shows that impairments in this critical nutritional pathway can have a far-reaching impact on brains, immune systems, detoxification, and other seemingly unrelated systems. Vicki has extensive experience in using dietary modification, appropriate supplementation, and functional lab testing to achieve optimal wellness. She has contributed her expertise to gfcfdiet.com and worked with schools to develop a whole foods approach to student meal planning. She lectures frequently, both locally and nationally, on topics such as autism, special diets for food allergies and intolerances, healthy pregnancy planning, and choosing appropriate nutritional supplementation. She currently serves on the board of the Neurological Health Foundation. You can type your questions into the questions section starting now and throughout the talk. These webinars are made possible through generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website at autism.com. And now I'm going to turn this over to Vicki.
Thanks, Denise. I really appreciate the introduction. And I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's one that's really dear to my heart. I think that we often spend our time chasing down diseases after they've occurred. And in the United States, I believe our opinion of prevention, or our impression of prevention, is basically testing things early enough to catch them before they become too severe. Whereas I really think that true prevention means stopping chronic diseases from happening before they even get started. And a lot of that boils down to listening to the body, looking at what the body really needs, and making sure that both in the earliest stages of conception as well as through life, we make sure that we're giving the body what it needs. So, you know, the epidemic of chronic illness in our kids is just skyrocketing, and we know that. 54% of kids in the United States have at least one chronic illness, and this data is a few years old at this point. It seems to be even increasing. We know that asthma is on the rise, allergic eczema is pervasive, hay fever and food allergies are skyrocketing out of control, celiac disease and obesity are all at much higher levels than they used to be. We know that autism is absolutely out of control. ADHD is, you know, a tremendous burden on our children as well as their school systems. Other learning disabilities also exist. We're seeing more and more kids diagnosed with mood disorders like bipolar disease, anxiety, depression, as well as dyspraxia and OCD. And all of those things are not only so difficult for the children who live with them, but for their families and for all of the healthcare system as well. So the best thing we can do is try to keep them from happening. One of the things I like to really point out is, and a woman I work with actually was the first one who said this to me, and I co-opted her explanation because I thought it was so terrific. You know, we spend a lot of time when we get pregnant thinking about how we're going to decorate the nursery, what color it's going to be, what kind of, you know, furniture we're going to get, and where, you know, what kind of rocking chair, but we don't often think about the fact that the baby's true first home is the womb. And that needs to be the cleanest and the most optimal home for the baby before they even get into whatever nursery or bedroom we're putting them in. And if we don't take care of that home first, the other stuff is going to matter far less. And one of the things that helps to keep mom maintaining a clean home for baby is her digestive tract. The gut is the gatekeeper for health. And it is the first, when we eat food, we ingest not only the nutrients in that food, but some of the toxins that come with that food as well. We also need good bacteria to promote normal digestion, normal detoxification, normal immune function, and even normal neurotransmitter function. So it's absolutely essential that we have a normal, well-functioning digestive tract. 90% of our neurotransmitters are actually produced in the digestive tract, and there's more communication from our gut to our brain than there is from our brain to our gut. 70% of our immune modulators are also mediated in the digestive tract. all of that requires good bacteria. Detoxification requires good bacteria. Antibiotics, however, deplete that good bacteria and impact not only things like our bowel movements, but things like our mood and our immune function and our ability to detoxify, all of which are going to absolutely be essential for normal fetal development. So when we take antibiotics, one of the things we always want to remember is that if we should only take them when absolutely needed, and when they're needed, we need to replete that good bacteria in a strong and powerful way. The other thing about poor digestion is that it depletes nutrient absorption. And nutrients are the building blocks of all cellular development. So if we don't have the right nutrients to grow new cells, we can't grow healthy babies. So some of the factors that come into play in figuring out or helping to promote positive and optimal fetal development is health of mom and dad as well, but for obvious reasons, mom's health has a much more powerful impact in many ways. So one of the things that impacts her health is her microbiome, and that means the good or the balance of good and bad bacteria in her digestive system. We also have to make sure that mom is able to detoxify well. If she's unable to detoxify well, then baby's not going to be exposed to more toxins in mom's body that we don't want them to be exposed to. We also want her immune system to be optimal. There is evidence that exposure to the flu or other viruses in utero can impact baby's neurological development. So we want mom's immune system to be strong enough to counter any germs she's exposed to during the prenatal period. In addition, chronic inflammation is linked to a host of chronic diseases. And we want to make sure, again, that any kind of inflammation, whether it comes from exposure to toxins from the environment, from food, from medication, etc., is well controlled while baby's developing. And genetics also play a role, and we'll talk about that a little more. As I mentioned, the environment is a huge factor. Exposure to toxins is going to make a big difference in baby's development, and we'll talk about all these things going forward. And things like sleep and electromagnetic frequencies, the things that come from your wireless router and your cell phone and your laptop, should be taken into consideration. Ideally, I usually recommend to my clients that they start at a year preconceptually. So if you want to get pregnant a year from now, you should start making sure you're cleaning yourself up now. I do have moms, obviously, that come to me and they want to get pregnant in 6 months or they're already pregnant. Well, obviously, we're not going to say it's too late. We're going to do the best we can, and we're going to do lots of good things that can help. But truly, as soon as it's possible to clean up mom's body, whether it's 10 years or 10 days before delivery, that's what we want to do. And I just always like to reinforce to my clients that prenatal health starts well before that positive pregnancy test. And like I said, ideally at least a year before you even consider getting pregnant. So let's look at some of the standard recommendations that the Academy of Pediatrics as well as other information sources put out. We know that we should avoid high mercury fish. And there's some real good guides. This one from the National Resource Defense Council is an excellent guide to mercury in fish. So these fish obviously should be avoided because we don't want our babies exposed to mercury. We also avoid things like sprouts and soft cheeses because they can harbor bacteria that can cause infections that can be problematic. Alcohol and caffeine, for obvious reasons, it's also recommended that those are avoided. What we want to do is increase things like protein, because protein is essential for developing new cells. We also want to increase folate. Folate is critical for developing new DNA and RNA, so obviously as you're producing these cells, you need that. Calcium and iron, as well as adequate calories, are really important as mom approaches pregnancy. But I feel like in addition to those simple recommendations, we also need to do a tremendous amount of house cleaning. And I liken this to house cleaning because we are cleaning up, especially that room that we're going to, keep our baby growing in. So the typical American diet, often called SAD, as I'm sure most of my listeners have heard already, standard American diet is a very sad diet. It's very high in sugar and processed foods, but it's nutrient poor, often very low in things like selenium or iron or zinc, and not rich in some of the other nutrients that help promote normal digestive function. The SAD diet, the standard American diet, increases inflammation. It also lowers immunity and impairs digestive function. So if we're thinking about what the previous slide said, how important it is to lower inflammation, to improve our immune system, to make sure our digestive function is optimal, that typical diet that's normally high in processed foods, normally high in carbohydrates, normally high in breads and starches and sugars, are absolutely the opposite of what's helpful for healthy functioning. In our environment, some of the things we want to look at cleaning up are the types of household cleaners we use, personal care products, lawn care products, and even the water we drink. If those are contaminated, if they're filled with chemicals, then those chemicals are absorbed through our skin. We inhale it, we digest it, we absorb it through our skin, and much of these chemicals are actually stored in our fat cells, and they stay there. We don't know we're not always able to excrete them properly. So it's really important that we look at all of those resources and try to use as many clean products, natural products, organic products as we can. Artificial colors, preservatives, sweeteners, and other additives are another big trigger for me. I like to get those out of the diet as early as possible. We know that they can interfere with brain chemistry. We also have data that certain of these ingredients can disrupt chromosomal development. They increase metabolic stress, and anytime you hear increased stress, increased metabolic stress, that means more inflammation. More inflammation has negative consequences for chronic diseases. We have very few studies on how these ingredients impact fetal development, and I personally know, we know that in children and in adults, it has these other types of effects. We don't know what it does preconceptually, but I can't imagine that it would only be worse than what it's doing to those of us who are already living. So we want to be really careful using these types of ingredients. In addition to which, I tend to really like to avoid processed grains and refined sugars. Obviously, we know that those are kind of endemic to our traditional diet, but they are, number one, addictive. The more we eat them, the more we want them. And that's why we sometimes feel like we have these cravings for these things, because they are addictive. But they kill our good bacteria. They're actually so harmful to our good bacteria, they make it hard for them to survive. And so when we eat these things, we're actually disrupting that good digestive health that I mentioned is so important. They also waste minerals. We tend to excrete more minerals when we're eating these foods, and they have been shown to impair fertility. So for all those reasons, we want to get those highly processed grains and sugars out of the diet. We also want to remove undesirable fats, like hydrogenated or trans fats, and we have much less of a problem with those than we did many years ago, but they still show up in our food, and they're still hidden in our food in a number of ways. In addition, we've been taught to believe that vegetable oil is really, really healthy and that we should avoid saturated fats, but there are some saturated fats that are actually good for us, things like coconut oil, palm oil, and when we have an imbalance of the ratios of vegetable oil to other types of fats, especially omega-3s, that can also cause inflammation. So excess vegetable oil can be problematic and is not as ideal as we have been led to believe. Contaminated water is another concern. Our water system is often, we know there's fluoride in most, public water supplies. There's chlorine in it. Both of those can be toxic, in addition to which very often the water supply can be contaminated with things like medications, heavy metals, and BPA. When people flush their medication down the toilet, it does get into the public water supply, and studies of our water supply has shown that it is contaminated with all sorts of medications as well as other contaminants. So getting a clean water supply is pretty important. I actually at home have well water where I live, and we check that well water carefully to make sure that it's not contaminated and that it is clean. But when I had children, we were automatically given a bottle of fluoride to put in our kids' bottles to make sure that they would get adequate fluoridation. I never did it, and their teeth are fine, but I just wanted to point that out because a number of people will, if you live in an area where there is not public water and you have a well, it may often be recommended to you to give fluoride to your babies. And you might want to research that more carefully. The other thing we want to think about in terms of mom is getting rid of any food allergies or intolerances early on. Things like gluten, dairy, soy, egg, and many more. People can be allergic to anything. They can also be intolerant to many things. And when that happens, it does cause inflammation. We also know that there are people who have fertility challenges, and when they go off gluten or dairy, sometimes those challenges disappear. So these elements in food can have some far-reaching effects on the way our body functions. And not everybody needs to get off gluten or dairy. I'm not making that a blanket statement. But for some people, especially those who feel that maybe they haven't gotten pregnant as quickly as they might have wanted, they should consider getting off gluten and dairy. But again, we really want to find out what those intolerances are. I find parents will come to me and say they've had chronic digestive problems or brain fog or many other issues for years. Now they want to think about having a baby. Well, one of the things I'll say to them is if you've got all these other symptoms, we need to look at what may be problematic for you well before you get pregnant. So that's when we start looking at food allergies and intolerances early in the process. IgE versus IgG-mediated food issues are something that families aren't always really familiar with. IgE is the true allergy. It's the anaphylaxis, the rashes, things that happen very instantaneously. IgG-mediated responses are not true allergies. They're considered intolerances or sensitivities, and they often can show up much later, a few days later. Sometimes you'll see more bowel distress. Sometimes you'll see more behavioral distress with those. So you can have one or both of those. But going and getting an allergy test, if it comes out negative, doesn't necessarily imply you don't have an issue with a certain food. Gut hygiene and food intolerance. All of that matters. Again, if you have food intolerances or food allergies, you're going to cause a lot of inflammation in your gut. Gut hygiene means, again, that good bacteria. And the other thing that's really important here is the exposure actually to germs and making sure that we don't have such a clean environment that our body doesn't know how to address germs. So when we eat foods, we don't need everything to be absolutely, spanking clean per se, because our body has to learn how to deal with germs. So I wanted to talk a little more about gluten and cow's milk and some of the diseases that have been linked to gluten and cow's milk intolerances. And we see allergies, constipation, ear infections, Crohn's disease, heart attacks and diabetes, multiple sclerosis, prostate cancer, depression, schizophrenia, cancer, fibromyalgia, and eczema. This is not a comprehensive list. It's a small list, actually. But again, if mom or dad suffers from these kinds of disorders or symptoms and they haven't been able to resolve them over time, this is a mom or dad I would recommend thinks about getting off gluten or cow's milk well before they become pregnant. So the other thing we want to think about is getting rid of unnecessary medication. Now, obviously, if you're planning to become pregnant, at some point you're going to get off birth control pills if you're actually taking oral contraceptives. However, it's important to know that oral contraceptives deplete your B vitamins. So if you've been on oral contraceptives, you don't want to start to become pregnant right away until you replenish the B vitamins that you have, because B vitamins are absolutely critical for normal fetal development. So we want to replete those B vitamins before we start getting pregnant. As I mentioned before, the antibiotics kill the necessary gut flora. They can alter the placental microbiome, meaning that baby can be born with a dysfunctional microbiome, which can set the stage for problems from birth onward in terms of both digestion but also neurologic development. We also want to be very careful with acetaminophen. Not only can it cause liver damage, but there is some evidence, emerging evidence, that it may be linked to ADHD and autism. So acetaminophen can be very, very problematic, and I tend to recommend that people avoid it prenatally and during the postnatal period as well. Mercury and heavy metals are another thing that we want to get rid of. Dental amalgams that contain mercury are, every time you chew on them, they do release some mercury into the system. Now, I want to be really, really careful to point out, if you have mercury amalgams, you should never, ever remove them during conception or pregnancy. You will release more metal into your system that will then be taken up by the placenta, by the fetus, than you would if you just left them alone. It's one thing to consider removing them well before conception or at some point, later, but never, ever remove dental amalgams when you are pregnant or when you are trying to get pregnant. High fructose corn syrup is another source of mercury. Again, high fructose corn syrup is so inflammatory and artificial that I hope nobody's eating it anyway. But if you are consuming it, you need to know that it contains mercury. We also know that arsenic is found in rice and chicken. Arsenic is also another heavy metal that can be very toxic. And there is lead in many toys and household products, especially ones that come from China, as well as in the air we breathe and in the ground. So again, we're never going to be able to get rid of all the metals that we're exposed to, and I'm not trying to scare anybody, but the important thing is if our body has a good microbiome, if it has good glutathione, if it has good nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that are necessary for detox, we can help move these toxins out of our body. But when we do things like, impair our liver with acetaminophen, when we do things like deplete B vitamins, which are necessary for detoxification, we then have trouble getting rid of these toxins. So it's really important to limit our exposure and support our body's natural detoxification systems. In terms of pesticides and chemicals, there's so much evidence, and it's growing every year. The number of studies that have been done looking at how pesticides and chemicals affect neurological development is pretty powerful. There was a study done over 10 years ago looking at the cord blood of 10 infants, a very small study, just 10 infants, but in their cord blood they found over 250 chemicals. Now, we were always taught to believe that nothing passes through the placenta, that it's very protective, and the baby is protected from all these things, but clearly it is not. And our babies are being exposed to all the chemicals that we're exposed to. We know that 99% of pregnant women have things like flame retardants and pesticides and plasticizers in their blood. So if it's in their blood, it's going into their babies. BPA, bisphenol A, is an endocrine disruptor. It's linked to obesity, depression, behavior problems, impairments in fertility, and all kinds of endocrine disruption. So again, BPA is what you find from soft plastics and the plastics in water bottles. So you want to use a glass bottle when you drink your water, and look all those soft plastics, those toys that some of our kids may use to bite on. We want to get rid of the BPA and make sure that we're buying BPA-free products. Pesticides, absolute linkages to cancer, ADHD, autism, lower IQs, and asthma. There are studies that show that in areas where heavy pesticide spraying takes place, there is a higher incidence of ADHD than there is in other areas. We know that these effects can be lifelong. We know that these compounds cross the placenta, and we need to be careful about them. A couple of other issues, dry cleaning solutions and household cleaners, especially those that are scented, are absorbed, again, easily into our bodies and into our fat cells where they stay, and they're very hard to get rid of. So how do we transform that space? How do we get rid of that? We've gotten rid of the trash. Now we need to transform and enrich the space where baby is going to grow. First thing I'd like to suggest is using nutrient-rich foods, things like healthy fats for fetal brain growth, and that includes omega-3 oils. So if you're not eating fish, and again, when you're pregnant, you're tending to avoid fish due to some of the heavy metal content, we need to make sure a good quality, clean omega-3 fish oil product is being taken. You need ample protein, because ample protein is going to help build the cells. That's what we build our cells from, is protein. We also need fiber-rich carbohydrates. So we're thinking not about bread and pasta and cereal and bagels. We're thinking about fruits, legumes, starchy vegetables, and regular vegetables. Those are going to provide the energy we need as well, but come wrapped in a package that's filled with vitamins and minerals. Adding anti-inflammatory compounds is also great. Things like spices have tremendously strong anti-inflammatory effects. Plant foods do as well. So using spices richly, tend to avoid those bland foods, but things like turmeric, curcumin is a wonderful, really powerful anti-inflammatory. We also know that rosemary and thyme and sage kill some of the bad bacteria that we want to avoid and also act as antioxidants. They all have rich anti-inflammatory components to them. So you want to use spices and herbs in abundance. And we also want to promote the development of good flora in our own digestive tract. And aside from taking a probiotic, which of course can be very helpful, some of the most terrific ways to get good flora is to eat fermented foods, naturally fermented foods. Yogurt is one. My caveat with yogurt is that most yogurt tends to come highly sweetened, and now sugar is going to kill the good bacteria, whereas so the few billion that you might have in your spoonful of yogurt, your container of yogurt, may be worthless because of the amount of sugar and sweetener that we're also consuming with it. So really what you want is unsweetened yogurt, natural yogurt. You also want things like sauerkraut, pickles, miso, kimchi, all of those are fermented. Kefir, kombucha, all of those are also fermented. Now, you can't just go to the grocery store and buy a jar of pickles or sauerkraut that's on a regular shelf. Those have just been basically stuck in vinegar and brine. They have not been actually lacto-fermented. The lacto-fermented foods are the ones that actually produce their own natural bacteria. They also produce enzymes and B vitamins, all of which are really fantastic for normal health. Most traditional cultures consume some sort of fermented food. Americans are one of the few who does not, and I think our poor health speaks to some of that. So getting a naturally lacto-fermented food into the diet is a terrific step. In terms of the basics of a healthy diet, I would love to see the food to be organic. Obviously, the less pesticides we ingest, the less we're going to expose our babies to. Whole foods, meaning unprocessed without artificial ingredients. So the less things that come in a box or a can or a bag, the better. Although obviously, a bag of beans or a bag of nuts is not a bad thing. But if it's boxed, it's usually not as ideal. Plant heavy. A plant heavy diet filled with non-starchy vegetables. Some starchy vegetables is fine. Fruits, nuts, seeds, legumes every day. Eat as much of those as possible. The diet should be ample in healthy fats. And again, I consider healthy fats omega-3s, fats from fish. I think animal fat is fine. I'm not really as worried about saturated fat as much of the traditional culture is. I do believe, again, coconut oil, palm oil, those are fairly healthy. Olive oil is great. Nut and seed oils are terrific. But I tend to stay away from soy oils and mixed vegetable oils and canola oils because those are not as healthy. We want our diet to be low in sugar and those processed carbohydrates I talked about, the white flours, the white foods, those are the least productive for us. Moderate in animal protein from clean living animals. So again, toxic animals make us toxic, clean animals keep us clean. Animals that have been conventional animals that have been fed pesticides, antibiotics, hormones, other chemicals are going to carry those in their cells and we're going to consume them. If you buy a pasture-fed meat, that animal, we know from studies that those animals actually have more omega-3s, they have more vitamin A, they have more vitamin E, they are healthier and better for us. So when you're going to eat animal protein, ideally pasture-fed animals are your best choice. And as I mentioned before, fermented foods should be a part of any healthy diet. In terms of specific nutrients, calcium is one that's essential, obviously prenatally and during, both before conception, preconceptually and prenatally. We want there is enough calcium for both mom and baby. So one thing to understand is that when we get pregnant, babies have a tremendous capacity to use us as their source of nourishment, and they will take from us what and they prioritize. So if you have inadequate calcium, baby, unless it's severely deficient, the baby will probably get enough for its needs, but your bones and your body is the one that's going to suffer from a deficiency. So it's important that you support both the baby and yourself. And so we want to aim for about 1,300 milligrams a day. It's important for bone development, but also heart regulation and blood clotting. And people don't realize that calcium is essential for those things. Neurotransmitters also require calcium for good communication, and we want to take it with vitamin D, magnesium, and zinc because all of those help absorb calcium. Iron is essential for red blood cell production, for hormone synthesis, really great with vitamin C foods that helps you absorb it. So if you're eating beef, tomato sauce is great, broccoli is great, some potato has vitamin C in it. There's, aside from what we can typically consider those citrus foods, there are many other foods that have vitamin C that are great to eat with your high iron foods. A nutrient that a lot of people aren't familiar with is choline, and choline is essential for brain development. It's especially important in the prenatal period, and some of the best sources are egg yolks, meat, and wheat germs. So for those who are able to eat wheat, they can use the wheat germ. Otherwise, egg yolks, meat, and even a supplement are a great way to get that choline in because it's essential for normal brain development. The omega-3s, as I mentioned, are critical. We know they're necessary for brain and central nervous system development. We know in moms, low levels are linked to preeclampsia and premature birth. And the brain is comprised predominantly of fat, much of which, and an important piece of that is the DHA that comes from omega-3s. So we really want to get adequate omega-3s in the diet. Folate, and I want to talk a little bit about folate because there's a lot of confusion about it. In your prenatal vitamin, you'll see something, often see folic acid. Folic acid is a synthetic form of folate that we're learning may not be as ideal as we thought it was. We do know that folate is essential for helping avoid things like spina bifida and other neural tube defects. I'm not saying we shouldn't have folate, but the food form is folate. The synthetic form is folic acid. Food folate is metabolized. It's changed from folate into something called folinic and then into 5-MTHF. The 5-MTHF is the active form, the form that our bodies use for detoxification, for DNA synthesis, for cell division, for growth of the fetal spinal cord, all of those things. So we need that 5-MTHF form. There are people who have genetic impairments where their gene to make this 5-MTHF isn't as efficient as it should be. It's helpful to find out. It's a very easy test to do to find out your genetics. And if you have an MTHFR mutation, if you have that mutation, it's all the more important to supplement with the right form of folate, which would be the 5-MTHF form. But I actually have most of my clients routinely on 5-MTHF, a prenatal vitamin that has 5-MTHF now. I don't give them one that contains folic acid in that form anymore. Food forms include leafy greens, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Vitamin D, recent study, it was an ongoing study for many years. It's just come out and looked at the role of vitamin D in siblings who had, newborns who had a prior sibling with autism, and whether vitamin D supplementation would help prevent the next child. And it did seem to show, it was a small study, but it did seem to show that good vitamin D supplementation seemed to be protective against a sibling developing autism. There is a pervasive deficiency of vitamin D in this country. We know that it's linked to lower maternal weight, less skeletal mass, but we also know that there may be links to autism. It's important for normal immune system function, lowers your blood pressure. Very often you'll get your vitamin D tested. Your doctor will tell you, oh, it's 31 or 32. The reference range is 30 to 100. It's fine. Ideally, an optimal dose should be somewhere above 50, maybe 50 to 75 is where you really want it to be. So if you've tested your vitamin D and it's in the 30s, I would still suggest pushing it up farther than that. And again, we see eggs as a very, very helpful food for lots of different fat-soluble vitamins. Egg yolks, fatty fish, and liver are all good sources of vitamin D, but it's easy enough to take as a supplement as well. Probiotics. I've mentioned them repeatedly. I'll focus on them a little more here. They do have, I wrote the words, their generational impact. We have seen through data that kids will have similar strains of bacteria in their guts as their grandparents did, and that when grandparents have disrupted flora, those disruptions can also be translated through the generations. So getting your digestive system optimized is really important, not only for your health, but for the health of your children and your children's children and beyond. We have to support gut health. Probiotics support gut health, detox, immune function, and they lower the incidence of gestational diabetes. So again, take those probiotics as a supplement if necessary, eat those fermented foods, promote the natural growth of good bacteria with a fiber-rich, vegetable-rich diet, which is what they thrive on, and avoid all those processed sugars and carbs, which deplete your good bacteria. Probiotics can also be depleted by antibiotics. We see that there's a higher incidence of colic, reflux, and diarrhea in kids, in babies who don't have good bacteria. And one thing to be really, really aware of is that the way babies, they're born with a very clean digestive tract. There's no probiotics in there when they're born. They need to colonize them from birth. And the way they do that is by passing through the vaginal canal and actually ingesting their mom's flora. So when you have a baby that's born by a C-section, they don't get exposed to the good flora they need. We see an increased incidence of eczema in kids who are born by a C-section, likely due to the fact that they don't have normal digestive function. So there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, don't do a planned C-section just because it's convenient for your physician. Try to aim for natural birth. If that's not possible for any reason, or everybody has their own choices. Obviously, I support everyone's choices. But if you must have a C-section, you can do a couple of things. You can give your baby an infant probiotic. They're readily available. Or you can actually just, believe it or not, swipe your vagina, put your finger in your baby's mouth, and try to help colonize them with your good bacteria, because that's the way they're going to get it normally anyway. but it's important if you have a C-section to make sure you are attending to your baby's probiotic needs. Iodine is another nutrient that we have less of lately. A lot of the salts we're using are not iodized. The salt in processed foods is not. So we're finding some people are iron deficient where we would never expect them to be, not to the point of goiters, but enough so that it impedes thyroid function. And since iodine is necessary for brain development, we really want to make sure people have their iron status is good. Supplemental iodine can come from sea vegetables, from kelp, and again from eggs. So I love to see some eggs in a pregnant mom's diet. Vitamin A is very controversial in prenatal care because there were some studies that were done years ago that showed that it had something called a teratogenic effect, which means that it caused some birth defects. Newer studies seem to contradict some of this information, and we know that A is really critical for vision, for bone health, for immune function, and for it actually also has some potent antiviral properties. So to me, I wouldn't necessarily supplement with vitamin A, but I would eat foods that were rich in vitamin A, and things like fish oil does come with natural vitamin A in it. Those are great ways to get vitamin A into your diet because we do think it's supportive of normal fetal development. Now, when we're thinking about eating, think about those daily meals. The typical American meal is high in carb. You know, the breakfast is high in carb, low in protein, and then we throw some coffee in there. Optimally, what we would want to see is a high-protein breakfast that's lower in carbs. So leftover dinner or eggs or sausage, you know, again, from a good, clean animal. But something like that is more optimal than the bagel, the cereal, the waffle, the French toast. Snacks are often things like coffee with chips and donuts. Ideally, what we want to do is a fruit or a vegetable with a little bit more protein. Lunch. Again, this is a typical American lunch, sandwich or a wrap with chips and fruit and soda. You're not seeing much vegetable there. You're not seeing much fiber. There's still a lot of sugar and a lot of processed foods. Obviously, what we want to see is more protein, more veggies, some fruit, some water, and if needed, some whole grains. Looking at plant foods versus cookies, candy, and chips for snacks. And again, the focus is on protein, vegetables, whole grains or starchy vegetables, and fruits come secondary. Nuts, beans, and seeds as part of your protein source and your fiber source throughout the day. So some of my favorite foods to include because of the nutrients that they contain and their health benefits are things like tomatoes and broccoli and all cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. Those are wonderful. But, you know, bok choy is terrific. But these are a few of the foods that I think make, you know, a beautiful rainbow in the diet and provide lots and lots of varied nutrients. In terms of nuts and seeds, I'd love to see people eat them more regularly unless they are truly allergic or intolerant to them. They can be eaten whole. They can be eaten as nut butter, nut flour. You can make nut milks and cheeses if you want, especially if you're dairy-free. There's lots of ways to eat them. But almonds are so, you know, a good source of calcium. They make a terrific almond milk. Almond butter is delicious. Cashews, walnuts, pecans, pine nuts, Brazil nuts, macadamia nuts, so many different nuts, so many different ways to eat them. But they provide a really great source of protein as well as good quality fat and other nutrients as well, vitamins and minerals. I also don't think as a whole we eat enough legumes. Now some people find that they don't tolerate legumes well. I know there are certain diets, certain paleo diets that don't include legumes. I still think that for most people they are well tolerated and a good source of nourishment. And these are some of my favorite. And again, it can be hummus, it can be black bean soup, it can be roasted chickpea snacks. There's so many different ways to eat legumes, and it's helpful to incorporate them more regularly into a diet. In terms of animal protein, ideally pasture-fed. All of these are good. Eggs, beef, buffalo, bison, turkey, chicken, any other fowl is fine. Pork is fine. Salmon in moderation and other low mercury fish. And again, I've given you the link to the NRDC guide because I think it's important that you know which fishes are high in mercury and which ones are safer. In terms of fats, oils, vinegars, and sweeteners, these are some of my favorites. I love to eat, and I know you guys have handouts, so I don't need to go through these one by one. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. If you're consuming grains in your diet, and some people do and some people don't, but if you are consuming grains, some of my preferred are things like quinoa, gluten-free oatmeal, wild rice, brown rice, amaranth, buckwheat. A lot of people like to use soba noodles to replace regular pasta. Now, some soba noodles are actually a combination of buckwheat and wheat. Others are 100% buckwheat. So if you're trying to be gluten-free, you actually want to use the 100% buckwheat soba noodles. But these are, there's another brand also called Tolerant that makes a nice bean pasta, as does Trader Joe's. So we have a lot of different options if we want something grain-based without using gluten if we're trying to avoid it. In terms of extras, some of the other things I love to see in the diet are nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast has a cheesy flavor. I have a recipe for a really fantastic nacho flavored kale chips that's dairy-free and uses nutritional yeast, and they're absolutely delicious. But nutritional yeast can be sprinkled over pasta and meat sauces or meatballs, and you can use it in a lot of different ways to make a cheesy sauce without using dairy if you're avoiding that. Kombu is a type of seaweed, also excellent. It helps if you're cooking beans. If you put some kombu in there, it actually makes the beans less gassy and also releases certain nutrients. Cacao powder is a wonderful antioxidant, and there's a lot of research about the health-giving benefits of cacao. I mentioned before herbs and spices, and these are some of the ones that I love. You'll see turmeric, again, which I mentioned, also known as curcumin, is a really powerful antioxidant, and it has tremendous health effects. Cumin, rosemary, oregano, curry, cayenne, all of these are wonderful. And if you're using, again, if salt, I prefer sea salt, Himalayan or Celtic, either one is good, but better than the processed salt that we get in the grocery store. But again, a lot of those sea salts are not as high in iodine, so you want to make sure you're getting some extra iodine from some sea vegetables and things like that. Potato starch, tapioca starch, and arrowroot can be used nicely as thickeners if you're trying to avoid gluten. Xanthan and guar gum can also be included, and those are fairly safe. And those are only necessary if you're trying to be gluten-free, but the other items above are great for every diet. We talked a bit about fermented foods. I just wanted to reinforce that here. They are so common in other cultures, and they provide enzymes, probiotics, B vitamins for proper digestion. So they're really, really critical. And there are some companies, Real Pickles is one, Zukai is another. I find local brands in my local stores all the time, farms that are making fermented vegetables. You'll usually find them in the produce section. They're usually kept cold, so you won't find them on a shelf somewhere. So that's where you get them, buy the vegetables in the produce section. Bone broths are something else that I really like to include in a healthy diet. They are similar to a stock, but they have a longer cooking time, and what we do is we add acid to them. And what happens with the addition of acid is that acid, over the long cooking time, helps to leach the minerals out of the bone. So when you put a chicken carcass or a turkey carcass or your beef bones into your stock, the acid will then work on those bones to pull the minerals out. It will also pull out things like gelatin, and the gelatin gives us collagen that helps us make healthy skin and muscle. It's a really easy thing to make. It takes time, but you don't have to really attend to it very much. And there's a wonderful recipe for bone broth in the Nourishing Traditions cookbook. So you can go check it out there. But bone broths are really good for gut healing. They provide lots of calcium and other minerals, so they're a great thing to add. If we're avoiding dairy, we want to make sure we are getting calcium either from a supplement or from some other calcium-rich food sources. So those, I named some here. I mentioned some there, which you can use to increase the calcium in your diet. And where it says milk there, it really should say milk sub. That's really what I'm talking about. So if you're going to get a milk sub, if you're avoiding calcium, you want to use something that is fortified with calcium. And a few of my favorite things. These are some foods that I eat a lot of, I love. I think they're tremendously healthy, and they don't feel like you're eating healthy. You just feel like you're eating great food, and they're very nourishing. Avocados are one. Berries, all sorts of berries are terrific in terms of their polyphenols and all the natural antioxidants that they provide. Nut butters, those kale chips I mentioned are one of my favorites. Hummuses and bean dips. I make creamy vegetable soups, which are really just pureed vegetables with some bone broth and lots of herbs and spices in them, and they taste terrific, and kids will often eat them when they don't want to eat their vegetables, so it's a great way to get vegetables into the diet. Veggie chips are another option. Dates and other dried fruits are wonderful when you're craving a little bit of sweetness. I also think we don't use pine nuts enough, and they're delicious. They have a very buttery flavor. They're very smooth, and you can make wonderful pestos from them. And again, if you're avoiding dairy, you can use nutritional yeast in a pesto instead of Parmesan cheese and get that cheesy flavor. And garlic is another phenomenal, not only is it taste terrific, but it's got tremendous antimicrobial effects and really helps to support the immune system. For families on the go, I know we're also always trying to run around and figure out how to feed our kids healthfully. I just mentioned here a few different foods that I think are great to keep handy when you need to run, because it helps make it easier to be healthy even when you're out of the house, which seems to be often the hardest time for parents, or parents to be to stay healthy. So a couple of breakfast ideas to tune in and to avoid some of those really highly processed breakfasts include things like oatmeal with nuts and dried fruit. And I make a great overnight oats that's really simple. It's just oatmeal with some chia seeds, some dried fruit, and a little bit of milk sub, and you leave it in the fridge overnight, and the oatmeal will absorb the fluid, and it's ready to go in the morning. And again, the chia seeds provide good fiber, good protein. The nuts provide protein, and it's a nice filling breakfast. But nut flour muffins are great. Eggs are terrific. Sausage, sweet potato hash browns, banana and nut butter, or tahini oatmeal cookies, and I have a recipe for that, and milk subs if you so choose. Here are some lunch ideas, repeating the same things kind of over and over again, but really looking at what is my protein source, what is my vegetable source, and then how do I layer those two, as those are the two most primary pieces of my diet, and then let me add some fruit, let me add some other things, some other things on the side, some grain, some fruit, whatever it may be, but looking primarily at what's my protein source, what's my vegetable source, and then what am I going to add around that. And a few dinner ideas. All fair. I try to keep them really easy. For those of us who love to cook, you can certainly make things that are much more complicated, but busy families tend to want quick meals, and all of these are fairly easy to make and healthy. Then we get back to the home, and we want to make sure that it is toxin-free, that it's nourishing. And remember, we're talking about our baby's home, which is our body, that it supports detoxification, promotes good immune function, enhances that good gut function, and reduces inflammation. So that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to take some questions in the next few minutes that we have.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vicki. That was really interesting, and we do have a lot of questions. So I'm just going to launch right in here. One of the first questions I've got, my son loves nut products, but it seems that when he eats them, his digestion changes. So she's saying basically his poop looks pale. Could it be that he's eating too much fat, or that he's not digesting it?
Could be a lot of different things, and I can't necessarily tell you which one it is. What I would do is first see if it changes with the type. Like if he's eating a whole nut and it's like that, it's one thing, but if he's eating a nut butter and it's not, that would kind of mean something different. If, it could be that he has a little problem with fat digestion, and maybe a digestive enzyme would help with that. I don't necessarily know that it's too much fat. You'll usually see the stools get very floaty, and you'll see fat in the stool when somebody's consuming too much fat. But pale stool can sometimes mean they are not digesting it properly. They may not have enough bile. Taurine can be helpful for that. But again, I can't tell you specifically since I don't know its history. I couldn't diagnose anything. But enzymes and taurine might help if fat digestion was the problem. But I would also play around with just, does it happen with any type of nut, or any form of nut, or just with one particular form? Okay. And he may just need a little enzyme help.
Okay, great. And that wasn't really a prenatal question, but I wanted to squeeze it in because I know she was looking for advice. So thanks for that. I had a question. Somebody asked about the difference between omega-3s and omega-6s and the role that each of those play, and sort of what sort of ratio you'd want to see.
Right. So the ratio that we generally consume in this country, I've seen so many different ranges, but the ratio is about 20 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3, or sometimes even higher. Ideally, what we want is a 4 to 1. So you should eat more omega-6s than omega-3s, but we are not eating nearly enough omega-3s, and we're eating way too much omega-6s. So the ratio really should be about 4 to 1.
Okay, and that's for pregnancy and just in general in your diet?
In general,
Okay, so no modification for a prenatal?
No.
Thing. Okay, people are asking about specific brands of nutrients, and I know that we're careful about not trying to endorse anything, but how can people be discerning about purchasing their supplements,
Yep.
especially for this
So,
pregnancy?
and say, whoever asked that question, I'm very grateful because it's something that I do try to address whenever I speak about this stuff. Supplements are not regulated in this country. I am a big proponent of using supplements in moderation as needed. I use them, I don't like to throw the kitchen sink at people, but I also think that you need to be very careful about what you're using, because at the least, if you buy a bad supplement, it may just not contain what it says it does. So you've wasted your money. At the worst, it could actually be contaminated with lots of heavy metals. So not only are you not getting the nutrient you need, but you're actually making yourself more toxic. So there are good companies and there are terrible companies. I do recommend generally, and this is my bias, I do sell supplements. I recommend people buy supplements from a professional who understands them, not GNC, not Vitamin Shop, etc. That you go to somebody who you trust, who picks and selects and helps you select for you. That being said, also, do not buy supplements on Amazon. I know it's cheaper. The reason it's cheaper is because very often it's either counterfeit or expired and relabeled. So you do not, if you can't tell me the name of the person, and this is kind of the thing that I always say, if you can't tell me the name of the person who sold you that supplement, don't buy it from them. Because if you know the person who sold it to you, if you have a problem with your supplement, they can go back to the manufacturer. That person should have a relationship with the manufacturer. They can go back there. I've had clients call me and say, I had a supplement, it smelled funny. They tell me the lot number, I call my vendor, and I make sure that they look at the lot number and they've tested it and they tell me what's in it, and they can follow through and make sure it's safe. If you can't follow through the bottle you bought back to where it was made, you shouldn't buy it. There are some really terrific high-quality companies. At a minimum, you want to look for USP certification or good manufacturing practice certification. That's the basic foundation of a decent multivitamin. Above and beyond that, I want my vendors to be third-party testing, which means they hire somebody who doesn't work for them to test their supplements. I want them to do batch testing, which means they test every single batch to make sure it's safe, as opposed to just one batch out of 20. And if I ask them to see the report, I can see the report from the batch. So those are the kind of things I'm looking at for when I look for a supplement. So if you're online and you're researching supplements and you look for a particular company, look and see what they say about their quality control. Who's doing it? How often are they testing? Because of those things, the supplements will be more expensive, but there's a reason for that.
Okay. I've got a question here about probiotics. They're asking if probiotics that you would use during pregnancy would be different than probiotics you'd use with your kids, or if you have kids already on probiotics, can you use the same ones?
Depends. Again, I do use them. There are some strains that differ. I use a company that makes a women's probiotic, and I like it because it has some specific strains that help with yeast infections and things like that. I do the infant product they have is called, infant formula, and it does have a different balance of different strains. And so I do tend to use some different ones, but I'd rather see a family, if they have one, I'd rather see the whole family use the one than not use it at all. But if you can, there are some differences in optimal strains and balance for different stages of life.
Okay, I've had several questions actually about prenatal testing and testing that mom might do if she's thinking about getting pregnant. Do you have tests that you recommend when moms are considering pregnancy? Are there any standard blood tests or stool tests or anything?
Absolutely. I recommend they test their MTHFR level, which is their HMHFR status, which is that genetic test. Mm-hmm. Absolutely should test their vitamin D. Basic, nutritional profile, basic profile of, complete metabolic panel, CBC, things like that to make sure everything else is normal. But vitamin D is critical, MTHFR is critical. I'm trying to think what else I usually recommend at this point. But, I do like to look at things like red blood cells, zinc, and magnesium, because those are really important just in general. But most important for me are vitamin D, MTHFR status.
Okay, and a couple questions related to that. One parent saying, my insurance company won't pay for vitamin D, so maybe you could address that, why they don't. And then the next question is, Can it be through just your standard Quest diagnostics, or do you need to do this through?
Yes, no, all of those except for the MTHFR can be done through Quest. Quest may do they do MTHFR. My understanding is that sometimes if your insurance won't cover it, it can be really expensive. And you can do a saliva swab for a DNA test. There are some companies, the one that I use, it's $75 for the DNA test as opposed to hundreds and hundreds if it's out of pocket at Quest. So, or even like a 23andMe will do it.
Okay.
Because it's a genetic test. So there are ways you can get the MTHFR done much more easily. In terms of vitamin D, I absolutely am dumbfounded that any lab will not cover, or any insurance company won't cover vitamin D testing at this point, because we know how pervasive the deficiency is. I mean, there are companies that will do lab tests where you pay out of pocket, but again, that can add up. But I really think you need to challenge the insurance company on that, because they should all be routinely covering vitamin D, at least at a yearly well visit. There are very few physicians, at least in the area where I live, who don't order it routinely now at your yearly physical.
Okay. All right, that's great. Great information. I think a lot of people have paid out of pocket for those tests over the years, so it's good to get that information. One of the questions here, they're asking about gut flora. It says, to build gut flora, many recommend Keeper. But if one should avoid, if one should avoid dairy, does the fermentation process break down the casein?
No, it doesn't. So there are, like I said, some people don't have a problem with dairy or can tolerate small amounts of it, and for them kefir is great. There is coconut kefir, there is water kefir, there are non-dairy kefirs available, so you can still use kefir, but if you can't take it, then use one of the other sources of fermented foods. You don't need to use that one.
Okay. Okay, great. And so as far as fermented foods, you talked a little bit about finding them in the grocery store. So you mentioned that typically you'd want to buy the refrigerated. Are the shelf stable ones less valuable in terms of fermentation and some of the good bugs that are in there, or does it make any difference?
I don't know too many shelf-stable ones. Again, if somebody goes to the grocery store and they buy like Vlasic pickles, those are not lacto-fermented. Those are just poured in, vinegar.
Okay.
So that's not the same thing. The ones that are lacto-fermentation does generally, because it's a living organism, they generally need to be refrigerated. So those are the ones you want to buy.
Okay, so people would want to differentiate. You can't just go buy sauerkraut off the shelf and.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
Absolutely not.
You wouldn't expect that.
It has to be. The key is lacto-fermentation, okay, as opposed to just. It may say sauerkraut on the label. If it doesn't say it was naturally fermented or lacto-fermented, if it's not fermented, it's not the same thing.